Hey everybody, I'd like to do a brief introduction to the Pollan article. So first off, after you've read the article and you are sure that you've kind of have adequate comprehension of the article, we go to our second step, which is understanding the rhetorical context. Remember, this step is really important in order to help kind of understand the strategy that the writer's using. So on this part of the critical thinking document, I've indicated which of those 7 questions are really important to really kind of pulling back the curtain on Pollan's strategy. The first one is, what is the genre? I'll put a link here to some other types of genres and what I mean by that. But first off, the genre is going for this article is going to be a long format essay. One thing we don't want to do is critique Pollan's article for being too long, because the very kind of requirement of the genre that he was writing in is is a long format. So what are some of the characteristics of a long format essay? So we expect it, A, of course, to be long, B, to be very nuanced and maybe a little more exploratory, might look at a couple of other kind of issues that are related to the topic. A lot of times there's creative aspects to it, very kind of literary creative aspects. Hopefully, as I'm kind of ticking through some of these characteristics, you're imagining, yeah, oh yeah, Pollan does get a little more nuanced in his argument. Pollan does seem to use some literary techniques. He uses a lot of metaphors in his text. That's the very kind of characteristic of the genre itself. The next one, where did the article appear? And I'm going to combine it here with to whom do you think the author is writing? So this appeared in the New York Times Magazine. And that's really important to think about, because the New York Times Magazine is a special insert that comes out only in the Sunday edition of the New York Times. And it kind of looks like a magazine, actually. And it's just got a series of long format essays. And usually, they're ranging on all kinds of kind of current events types of issues. And then to whom do you think the author is writing? We have to ask ourselves, A, who reads the New York Times, and then B, who reads the New York Times Magazine, which is, this Sunday insert. So we're kind of thinking about the person who really likes to get their information from about cultural events, or about current events, from reading, right? Instead of watching the news or watching, some sort of YouTube, this person is a very literary person, somebody who likes to read and learn about the world, somebody who's curious, somebody who is going to spend their Sunday afternoon kind of reading through this special Sunday insert. This is somebody who probably really wants to kind of have a more kind of deeper understanding of the issues, doesn't want to be spoon-fed in terms of what to think about the issues, just wants to feel like this person wants to feel like he or she's getting informed on the topic. So those are really important things to think about as well. When was the piece written? Remember that this one is a little bit dated, and I wanted to do that on purpose. October 25th, 1998. So we want to think about, what does the world know about genetically engineered foods in 1998? So not a whole lot. They're just coming on the scene. Today, I think everybody knows what GMO foods are. We call them genetically modified organisms, or genetically engineered foods. I think most people know what those are today, but in 1998, not so much. This is kind of a new technology on the scene. And the last one, the author's purpose here. I'm sorry, not the last one, second to the last one. What is the author's purpose? Pollan's purpose is very interesting. He sets up in his text his thesis paragraph right here: by growing my own transgenic crop and talking with scientists and farmers involved with biotech, I hope to discover which of us was crazy. Meaning, are the Europeans crazy, or are the Americans crazy, right? So are Europeans overreacting, or are we underreacting to genetically modified foods? So that's his explicit thesis idea. But when we look at some of the cues in this text, we see that he is actually hoping that his audience comes to agree with his interpretation, which is, we are kind of underreacting to this technology. If we look at his title here, if we look at how he sets up the issue on the arguments in each one of these different sections that he has. When we look at the very end of his essay, which is when he says, some people get kind of disappointed. They go through this whole long essay and they're like, he doesn't even eat the potato salad, right? But when we get to the very end of the essay, he says, until I know more, I choose not. So that's very kind of clear that he thinks we're kind of underreacting. So on the onset, it seems like it's this investigative piece that the writer is just trying to kind of give us the information, but we see that Pollan is also kind of putting in his stance on this, his position throughout the entire argument. And then the last one, the primary frame. I put this one as a very important question because he doesn't decide to look at this issue just through the effect on the farmers or just through the effect of whether or not the food is safe. He kind of opens up the larger range, kind of the whole scope of this issue when he's exploring this at this time new technology. Okay. So then when you are in the text, I will share my annotations with you guys as well. So I'll link to the annotations here at the top of this document so you guys can just sign in to annotate and see my annotations. So again, as I did with Foster Wallace, I've highlighted different areas, so pay attention to the structural choices. So he's doing these little metaphors, planting, sprouting, growing. In each one of these different sections, Pollan is making a different argument. See if you can identify what argument he's making in each one of these sections. The other thing I want you guys to pay attention to is how Pollan sets up Monsanto. So from the very beginning, he talks about Monsanto when he plants these things. He says, I got these things. They're this licensed in here, and they're intellectual property of Monsanto. A lot of people who've never heard about Monsanto, they get to the end of this article and they're like, what's the deal with Monsanto? They seem a little creepy. Kind of pay attention to how he kind of sets up Monsanto. Again and again, he quotes Monsanto, he interviews Monsanto, he gets them on record with what they're saying, and then Pollan goes off and investigates, does more kind of journalistic inquiry on the answers that Monsanto had given him to his questions, and then he kind of finds out that what Monsanto had told him wasn't exactly the whole truth. So he does that again and again. That's part of his rhetorical strategy, is to kind of get Monsanto on record and then show how Monsanto is not really being forthright with their statements. So that starts out right at the beginning and it kind of continues through the rest of the article. Be paying attention to that. I also want you guys to pay attention to some of the subtle sarcasm that Pollan uses here. So right here in the very beginning, when he's talking about this in a dazzling feat of positioning, meaning positioning is marketing, right? So how somebody establishes their product in a marketplace, and dazzling, of course, is kind of astonishing, right? This is kind of an amazing thing that they've done. So in a dazzling feat of positioning, the industry, that would be the biotech industry or genetically engineered industry, has succeeded in depicting these plants simultaneously as the linchpins of a biological revolution, right? Brand new revolution on the scene. And oddly enough, the same old stuff. And look at his language there. Look at that kind of informal language, the same old stuff. And then later on, he says, this convenient version of reality, that something can be a linchpin of a biological revolution and the same old stuff, that convenient version of reality. That's a contradiction, right? That those two things can't be true at the same time. Here's Pollan's sarcasm. This convenient version of reality, right, has been roundly rejected across the Atlantic. So in Europe, they just said that can't be true. It can't be biological revolution and the same old stuff at the same time. But in the United States, we're eating them for dinner, right? So we're kind of fine with it. And so if you kind of pay attention to the kind of way that Pollan is using language here to really kind of highlight kind of how in this case, using sarcasm, right? To kind of get us kind of interested in, well, can that be true and what's going on, right? So pay attention to how he kind of sets that up. He does this again throughout the article as he's, when he's talking, especially when he gets into talking about the safety of the plants and the regulation. So when he gets into this section here on flowering and he starts kind of asking, what's going on with the regulatory agencies, and is this stuff as safe as we hope that it is? He goes into kind of this, it kind of reverts back to some of this kind of astonishment, I guess might be how we might want to say it, as he's going back and forth. Notice what he's doing here. I checked with them, then I went over here, then I went over to here. And every time he's trying to get an answer, he's kind of getting put on a little cat and mouse game. And he gets to the very, very end of this. And he's kind of throwing up his hands here when we finally get to the end of this, and he's exasperated, and he says, "But isn't turning a potato into a pesticide a material change?" Remember, these agencies are playing this kind of language game so that they don't have to be held accountable for kind of regulating the technology. And then it says it doesn't matter. The Food and Drug Administration, Food and Drug Cosmetic Act specifically bars the FDA from including that information. And then he just kind of ends that section. He kind of puts his research out there and lets the audience kind of decide, what do you think? Has this stuff adequately been tested? And do we really know what's going on? He lets the audience kind of make up their mind on that. Remember, that's an important strategy when we come back into to whom do you think the author is writing. So remember, his audience doesn't want to be told what to believe. They want to feel like they're educated and they can make their own choices in terms of what they believe. And that's what Pollan's doing here. He's just giving them the information, and then the readers can make their own minds what all this stuff means. When he goes into the meeting the beetle section, I don't want to go too in depth on this. We can have a Zoom chat if you guys want to talk about the article in more in depth. I just want to keep this video rather short. It's already a little bit long, but I want to keep the video a little bit shorter. When he goes into this meeting the beetle section, he makes an implicit argument about which mode of agriculture. The beetles is of course the metaphor for the different farmers. Each one of these farmers represent a different mode of agriculture. So the first guy that he talks to, Danny Forsyth, is doing what it's called conventional farming, that is using the regular kind of system of chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers in order to get the crops. So he interviews this guy, and we end up kind of learning some information about that mode of agriculture through Danny Forsyth. I like to say in these sections, Pollan gives a zinger in each one. So with the Danny Forsyth, we find out that he won't even eat his own crop, and we find out he's not making hardly any money. When he goes to meet the next beetle, which is Steve Young, and he's somebody who's doing the genetically engineered foods, the zinger we find out here is that Pollan wasn't able to interview Young on his own. He had to have a Monsanto escort or somebody from the company there along with the interview. And we also find out this refuge plan is just kind of a joke. And then when we get to the Mike Heath, the very last guy, the guy who's farming organically, the zinger is he's actually really profitable. He can eat his own food. He feels good about the food that he's bringing in here. So when we look at the way that Pollan kind of organizes this Meet the Beetle section, the implicit argument that he's ultimately making is, of course, that the organic model seems to be the best. So be paying attention to how he develops that argument and in each one of these illustrations. Okay, you guys, again, I am happy to have a Zoom chat with you guys if you want to go through and kind of notice different things in this text. I'm really happy to do that. And just let me know. Okay, we'll talk soon. Bye.